Good morning. Why is Purim so unique? We're going to learn today, as part of our Purim Classes, the uniqueness of the Yontif of Purim and a few other interesting things by way of the messages of some of the history of Purim, the details in regards to the laws of Purim, the Megillah of Purim, and so on. So join us. We tell the joke about two friends, David and Yaakov. They had a routine. They would go to the bar every evening after work, and each one would order a glass of whiskey. Well, after many, many years of doing this, Yaakov passed away. So David comes to the bar himself, and he orders 2 glasses. The bartender looks at him, and he says, what's up? He says, one for me, and one I'll drink for Yaakov. Okay. And this goes on for like 6 months, and every evening he comes in with his order, 2 cups, one for him, he drinks one for him, one for Yaakov. One day he comes in and he orders just 1 glass. And the bartender says, what happened? He says, I was by the doctor this morning. He said, I have to stop drinking. What is really the greatest holiday of the year? What's the greatest? What's the holiest? What's the most joyous yontif? And the truth is that there isn't one correct answer to what's the greatest yontif. Every yontif has its uniqueness. We say it about Pesach, we say it about Hanukkah, we say it about every yontif that we experience. We say, oh, this is the greatest yontif. However, there's a medrash, which the Rebbe brings many times, in Yalkut Shemaini, which tells us that all of the Yom Tovim will become batel, will become basically expired, annulled, besides Purim. Purim will never become batel. There's another opinion of Eliezer says that not only Purim, also Yom Kippur is not going to become batel. So not Purim and not Yom Kippur. And there's another opinion that says, or another lashon that says, not only Purim, but also Hanukkah and Purim will become batel. But everyone agrees that Purim will still be here after the Geula, after Mashiach comes. Just to understand a little bit, what's this a concept that when Mashiach comes, the Yom Tovim will be batel? What's it supposed to mean? The reason why a yontif is special, let's say Shavuos, why is Shavuos a holiday over the day before or the day after? It's because there's a certain holiness that comes into the world on a yontif. It's not just a regular mundane day, it's a holy day, right? Holiday. That's why it's special. And every yontif has its specialty. So Pesach is not a weekday because there's a certain aura, spirituality, a holiness that's going on in the world, which makes the day special, and it makes it holy. Mashiach comes, the entire existence has that holiness. Geula, the era of post-Mashiach's arrival, will be holy every day. There won't be anything special about Pesach or Shavuos or Rosh Hashanah, big deal. It's as holy as the day before because we're living in a spiritual time. We're living in a holy era. So the concept of when Mashiach comes, we won't have the holidays, is because every day is going to be a holiday. The exception is Purim. Purim is so holy, even when you compare it to the other days of the year, even when you compare it to the time of after Mashiach comes, when everything is holy, it's even going to be holy compared to that. In other words, it'll be holier than the holiness that comes to the world when Mashiach arrives. It's brought into Kunei Zohar that why is Yom Kippur called Yom HaKippurim? Because there'll come a time, in Hebrew, ki, for those that are watching, and in Hebrew the word ki, it means like. Something is similar to something else. Yom Kippur is going to be like Purim when Mashiach comes. Right now, Yom Kippur is a day of infliction of certain types of pain, if you will, refraining from physical experiences. We don't eat, we don't drink, we don't bathe, we don't shmir, etc. When Mashiach comes, it's going to be a day of pleasure. It's going to be like Purim. And on Purim, we don't fast. We don't have any type of infliction of the opposite of pleasure. So that's what's going to be. When Kippur is going to come, it's going to be transformed because the time that we're going to be in is so holy, it's going to be changed to a day of enjoyment, of pleasure, and so on. Not just is Purim going to be here even after Mashiach comes, but Megillas Esther. The Rambam tells us that all of the Sifrei Nevi'im and Ksuvim, all of the books of prophets and scriptures, essentially won't be applicable, won't be studied after Mashiach comes. What we're going to have is Chamisha Chomshei Torah, the 5 books of Torah, and the oral Torah, Mishnah, Talmud, Halacha, and so on. But Nevi'im, prophets, and scriptures, we're not going to be using that after Mashiach comes. The exception, he says, is Megillas Esther. Even though it's written later, it's in the category, it's one of the 5 Megillas, category of scripture. However, when Mashiach comes, that will be the exception. We're going to use that as well. There's something very, very special about Purim. It's going to continue even after Mashiach comes. Megillas Esther will never be irrelevant or extinct. We're always going to be reading it. So you see this uniqueness. We also find this regarding practical experience of Purim. The Gemara tells us, Sechta Megillah Daf Zayin Amud Beis, Chayiv Inish, the Besume B'Puraya, a person is required, we'll translate it as rejoice, but to be so happy on Purim that he doesn't differentiate between Arur Haman and Baruch Mordechai. He doesn't make a difference between blessed is Mordechai, cursed is Haman, and blessed is Mordechai. Usually, people know the difference between who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, right? Wake someone up in the middle of the night, he's half sleeping, and you ask him, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, he knows. It's a level where the joy is so great. A person said so much l'chaim. They're at a level where they don't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. We don't say that about any other holiday. Pesach, we came out of Mitzrayim. Let's celebrate. Let's celebrate to the level where we're not going to know the difference between Paray and Moshe. We don't say that. The Purim has this overarching theme. It's like a level of its own. Why is that? I want to ask another question, which not as strong, but it'll help us understand what Purim is really about. Why is the Megillah, for those that are watching on Facebook and YouTube, hello, you can ask your questions, we'll be glad to answer them. Why is the Megillah called Megillas Esther? Okay, the story that we read on Purim, the background, what happened to the Jewish people, the decree against the Jews, how we were saved. Why is it called Megillas Esther? Shouldn't it be Megillas Esther Mordechai? It should be. At least give Mordechai some credit. But yet we call it the Megillah of Esther. And if you think about it, when we were really in trouble, and Esther, as you know, was the queen, and she had access, so to speak, she could convince her husband to stop this decree to wipe out all the Jewish people, she didn't want to go. She wasn't willing to go. Mordechai had to convince her. He had to pressure her. He actually threatened her that if you don't go, you should know we'll be saved anyways. And don't think that you're going to be out of this decree because no one knows that you're Jewish. Word will get out. Eventually they'll get to you too. That's how it always happens. And don't think that, because you're in the palace, you're safe. But we'll be saved anyways. You and your family will perish. He had to pressure her. Mordechai had to put tremendous influence on Esther to convince her to go to Achashverosh. She didn't want to go. And yet we call it Megillas Esther. Now, just as a side note, she has good reason why not. She didn't want to go. She wanted it to be successful. She didn't want to just go in and get killed. You can't walk into Achashverosh without being summoned. All that aside, Mordechai was of a different opinion. Mordechai said, go and talk to him. It's their only chance. And yet the story of Megillah, we call it Megillas Esther. We don't say Megillas Esther and Mordechai, or give Mordechai some kind of credit. In addition, I'm going to ask another question. We have the day before Purim, it's called Tainis Esther. It's a fast day of Esther. The Rambam in Hilchos Tainis, when he discusses all the fasts that we have 6 fasts, right? Tzem Gedalia, Yom Kippur, Asara B'Teves, Tainis Esther, Shavasa B'Tammuz, and Tisha B'Av, right? 6 fasts throughout the year. And he explains that we have on the 13th of Adar a fast called the Fast of Esther. The day before Purim, we fast, we don't eat or we don't drink. Why do we have this fast day? So the Rambam tells us, because it's to remember the fasting and the praying that the Jewish people had in the times of Purim. What was the story? The decree against the Jewish people broke on the 13th of Nisan, 2 days before Pesach. What happened was as follows. The Haman convinced Achashverosh to make a decree to kill every Jewish man, woman, and child on the same day. No other tyrant in history, no other dictator tried to destroy the Jews in one day. They tried to destroy the Jews many times, unfortunately, and we're here to talk about it. However, it was in a very, it was gradual. It wasn't in one day. You can't get everyone, especially throughout the entire civilized world. And Achashverosh was the king over the entire, basically, civilization. In one day, he decided to do it. So when we found out about the decree, the Jewish people fasted for 3 days. It was 2 days before Pesach, and on Pesach itself. We fasted 3 days. There was no Seder that year, at least not with matzah and wine. Our lives were in danger. We were davening to Hashem. So the Rambam says to remember that fast, we fast every year the day before Purim. However, there are other Rishonim that argue, commentaries that argue, and they say, 1 second. If that's the case, why are we fasting only 1 day? And besides, it's the wrong date. We fast the day before Purim to remember the fast that they did 2 days before Pesach. It's not exactly, you don't usually commemorate holidays on a convenient day, right? You don't push off Yom Kippur because it's not on a weekend. It doesn't work that way. So they say the reason why we fast is for a different reason. We fast because there was an old Jewish custom that whenever we went to war, we fasted. When you go to war, the Jewish people fasted. You find this by Amalek. When the Jewish people had a war with Amalek, there was fasting. So obviously, if the Jewish people were having a battle with their enemies the day before Purim, the day before the decree was supposed to happen, then obviously there was a fasting. So we fast. So if that's the case, why is it called the fast of Esther? So according to the Rambam, it makes perfect sense because he says Esther was the one that said that we should fast. When the decree broke, just to go back a moment, when the decree broke, and Mordechai told Esther, go to the king and tell him to knock this off. She said, I can't. I wasn't summoned. It's dangerous. He'll kill me just for walking in there. But in the end, she said, you know what? Tell the Jews to fast for 3 days. Then I'll go. And if the Rambam says that's what we fast, so we're remembering that fast, of course it's called the fast of Esther. Because we were, she's the one that initiated this fast. Okay. But according to the other opinions, that this is because of a war, and when there's a war, when there's a battle, Jewish people fast. Why is it called the fast of Esther? The Rebbe gives a fascinating explanation. He says like this: who fasts when there's a battle? The soldiers are not allowed to fast because they're going to war. They have to be strong and with it and fresh. They can't sit and fast. The people that are not going to war, they're the ones that fast. So when the Yidden were fighting with Amalek, who fasted? Moshe. He was on the mountain davening to Hashem. Everyone else basically was at battle. They weren't fasting. Moshe was fasting and davening to Hashem to help the Yidden. They should succeed in the battle, which we were successful. We won. But that's the point is that when there's a war, there's fasting that goes on. But who's fasting? Not the warriors. During the times of Purim, who went to battle? Who was the decree against? Men, women, and children. Achashverosh made a decree that every single man, woman, and child of Jews could be killed. He never annulled this decree. What he did was he said a day before, you could get up and fight your enemies before this decree comes into effect. So who had to go stick up for themselves? The men, the women, and the children. They were all at battle. The only person that didn't go to war was Esther. She was in the palace. She's the only one that fasted in Tainus Esther. And that's why the Rebbe says it's called Tainus Esther, because the Jewish people had a war. Only one Jewish woman fasted, because everyone else was at battle on some level. And that's why we call it Tainus Esther. Whether it's according to the Rambam, because she's the one that initiated that fast before Pesach, or it's like according to the other Rishonim, as the Rosh says, and bringing from the Rabbeinu Tam, that this is because Esther was the only one that fasted while the Jews were at war. Okay, now we understand why it's called Tainus Esther. Let's understand why is it called Megillas Esther. What's the background before calling this story of the whole Purim that we read by night and by day? We call it the Megillah of Esther. Why not Megillah of Esther and Mordechai, as asked before? So the Gemara tells us, Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, that Esther Sholcha Esther the Chachamim. Esther sent a message to the sages after the whole story of Purim, and she said, "Kavuni l'deiros. I'm wanting to establish this for generations to come. People should know the story. Let's write this down. Let's record everything that happened. There was a decree against the Jewish people, an unprecedented decree by a man named Haman under the kingship of Achashverosh. They wanted to destroy. Right, let's write the whole story down." And the sages wrote back, "No, we don't like this idea. Because you're instigating, you're provoking hatred, jealousy, and animosity from the other nations of the world. What are you going to write? You, Achashverosh, tried to kill us. In the end, we won over you. All these enemies tried to destroy us, and let's keep quiet about it. We were saved. We'll do our thing. I don't think you have to write," the sages said, "a whole long Megillah, a scroll that's going to say the whole story. It's okay. Let's not do that. Let's better just celebrate ourselves. Let's not chronicleize it." Rashi says, Esther said, "Kav'uni l'deiros," he says, "Kav'uni l'yamtif," establish me for the yantif. U'likriya li'es li l'shem. I should have a name. I should be known, which is pretty strange. You wouldn't expect someone like Esther Amalka should be asking, "I want to be remembered historically. I want to have a name. I want people to know that I existed. I want them to." Really, it's a little bit not exactly what you would expect from Esther. So there are commentaries that explain this, and they say it wasn't vanity. It wasn't coming from Gaiva. She wasn't looking for credit per se, but she was afraid of two things. Remember when she went to marry Achashverosh? Why did she go? She was forced. Every woman had to go sign up for this beauty pageant contest. She didn't want to go. She was forced. But she's concerned. Someone else is going to write the story. Her argument to the sages were why we should do it. She said, first of all, the writers of Persia had already chronicalized this story. It's already recorded. Don't think no one's going to know. What I'm afraid of, she thought, they're going to say the story in their version, that I went to the king on my own will. I wanted to marry this non-Jewish king. I don't want anyone to say that. I want to set the record straight and write the story the way it really happened. Because they're writing the story in their history books. And I want to set the record straight. Give me a chance to save my name. People will say, "Oh, there was a woman, Esther, and she was with the wrong crowd, and she ended up marrying the non-Jewish king." I don't want that. That's one explanation. The other explanation was she was afraid they're going to turn her into a goddess. There's a whole nation who was set to be destroyed, and Esther rolls in and saves the day. Maybe they're going to say, there's some kind of idol called Esther. Maybe they'll worship her. And she said, "I don't want this to be the case. I want to write the story. There was a human being, a woman who was forced to go to Achashverosh. In the end, she ended up being the queen and saving the day. That's what I want." So she wasn't looking for honor or fame. She was looking to make sure that history has the story correctly and that we don't take things out of proportion about her own life. And there's one more beautiful explanation. The Sifsei Chachamim and Megillah brings, Esther was an orphan, and she wanted to send a message to all the orphans and widows that never despair. Look what happened to me, she says. I was a nobody, and I ended up the queen of Persia, the most powerful queen, the highest position that I could possibly attain at that time. Don't despair. She wants to send a message to all the orphans and the widows, and in general, people that feel that they're on the brink. It's over. There's nothing. They can never get out of their situation. Just one second. Look at Esther. She was an orphan raised by an uncle, and she ends up not just having an identity, but becoming the queen and becoming Esther Amalka. And she never thought it was possible. So I'm not looking for fame, she says. I want to give hope, encouragement, motivation, inspiration that they should have for years to come. People should have this. Okay, so that's why it's called Megillas Esther, because she's the one that pushed for it. Initially, it wasn't even going to be written. I just want to mention there's some opinions that say that it was written by prophecy in Eretz Yisrael a long time later, many years later, in Yerushalayim. And the way to reconcile that opinion is that the Megillah was written by Mordechai and Esther, and then it was lost, and later Chazal wrote it out of through divine wisdom, through Ruach HaKodesh, or prophecy, they wrote it. In any case, the point is like this: that it's called Megillas Esther because she's the one that initiated, that pushed for it, and for a very good reason. But Chassidus has another explanation, which I want to share today. There's an old story that happened during communist Russia. Rabbi Ari Levin was the Rav at the time in Moscow. And it was an era where it looked like Judaism was basically wiped out. Obviously, there were people practicing Yiddishkeit, in the underground, so to speak, but it looked like it was over. And a guy walks in to the shul. He says, Rabbi Levin, I want to talk to you privately. Okay. He says, I'm Jewish. I want to do a bris for my son, but nobody is allowed to know about it. Nobody, not even other Jews. I want just me and you. The reason is because for a living, he says, I manufacture and sell crosses. All the churches and the non-Jews. And if anyone finds out, it's over. It's over. Okay, I'll do a bris for your son. And the two of them come to their house. It's him and his, and the father and the moil. And the father of the baby, this person was the sandik. He's holding the baby. And the moil, the Rav does the bris. Even the mother of the baby wasn't there. Go figure. They do the bris. And when he's done, he asks him, he says, tell me, I see all over your house there's crosses. You do this for a living. Your wife's not even here. Could you explain to me why it's so important to you to risk everything, and probably more than just business, for this bris? He says, listen, maybe I've made mistakes in my life and made wrong choices because of other influences and whatever, but I want to give my son a chance. I want that, God willing, he will have the opportunity to live like a Yid, and therefore, I'm giving him this bris. And he said, this is what Shlomo Melech compares the Yidden to Yainim, to doves. A dove never goes too far away from the nest. It leaves when it comes back. It leaves, it comes back. It's always checking up what's going on. The Yidden have a similar thing. We are, sometimes in history, we went away from Yiddishkeit, but we came back. We never went too far away. Even when things were not the way they're supposed to be, we left and came back. If we read the Megillah carefully, we'll notice that this is a time in history that was the most similar to the way we are today. Here's what I mean. Earlier this week, we had a class on the origin of Achashverosh. We brought certain, I'll post it in the comments on YouTube, but there was, we brought many different commentaries about the situation that was going on with the Jewish people at the time. I'm going to share a different commentary now, what was happening with the Jewish people at that time in history. Materially, physically, the Jewish people were okay, according to this opinion. It was difficult because the first time since we became a nation that we were chased away from Eretz Yisrael. We weren't on our land the first time. We didn't have a Beis HaMikdash. Hanukkah, when Hanukkah happened, it was a high point for the Jewish people. We had a Beis HaMikdash, we had a Kohen Gadol, we had a high priest, and so on and so forth. And we didn't, and then the enemies came and made us problems. Purim, we were chased away. We were in a foreign land, not in Eretz Yisrael. Spiritually, there was a problem, but materially, physically, we're okay. We had relationships with the locals. They treated us equally. Again, we shared Wednesday, or whenever it was, two Wednesday, that there were high taxes and there was a problem. It seems that was at the very end. But in general, that era was very good for the Jews. They were fine. They lived in America of the time. And they had opportunities. They could get educated. They could get jobs. They could do their thing. It was fine. Even the queen was Jewish. Now, it's true, no one knew she was Jewish, but there was no rule that if you're Jewish, you can't sign up. On the contrary, everyone has to sign up. It was an interesting time. All of a sudden, a decree comes out, and it says that anyone that belongs to the nation of Mordechai will be killed. Okay? Now think about it. It reached such a level of assimilation or blending with the rest of the nations of the time that Achashverosh made a party to celebrate his kingship, right? 3 years after he became king. And according to this opinion, he was actually not even from royal blood. He was a slave by the king. He was in charge of the horse stables. Okay? And somehow things turned out for him. He married well. Okay, he married Vashti, king's daughter, Belshazzar's daughter, and he becomes eventually the king, the most powerful person at the time. Made a party to celebrate. You ever went to a long party, like 5 hours, 6 hours? Anyone? No? Well, he made a party for half a year, 180 days. They partied, and the Jews were invited, and he even offered the kosher food if you want. It says "Kirtzain ish v'ish," like the desire of ish and ish. Who's ish? Ish Yehudi is Mordechai, and ish tsar ve'oyev is Haman. He made whatever you want. We'll get you kosher food. We'll order for you whatever you like. No problem. Mordechai was hollering and telling the Yidden, you're not allowed to go. It's not a good environment and so on and so forth. But the Yidden went. That's how accepted they were in society. You could go and you could join in and you could even be at our party. No one said, "Oh, you're Jews, you're second-class citizen." There was a time in history when you really. And as a result of eating and participating in that feast, in heaven it created a decree, and Haman came to Achashverosh, and he said, "Listen, these people here, you have this crazy nation among you, and they're not normal. They're separate. They're not good for the economy. Think about it. They have this thing called Shabbos," he tells Achashverosh. 52 days a year, they don't work. It's not like today where there's a 3-day weekend already, or 2-day weekend already for everyone. It was Persia. In 300 and something before the Common Era. There was no, they take off every week, they take off a day. They don't just take off Shabbos. Friday afternoon, they're already taking off. Plus, there's Yom Tovim, there's holidays, there's 17, 18 days, whatever it is, that we don't work. They're not giving anything to the country. They're not giving anything to the government. Who needs them? Let me give you, Haman said, 10,000 silver pieces, and allow me to wipe them out. Achashverosh was not let's just say, such a great guy. He said, fine. And you keep the money. You can wipe them out. So he comes in and makes this decree that anyone that belongs to Mordechai will be killed. If you're part of this nation, you could be killed. You would expect the Jewish people would say, 70 years we're living here. I'm not Jewish. I have Jewish roots, but I'm Persian. I'm just a regular guy, right? It'll save your life. You could just get out. Not one Yid said, you know what? Not really so Jewish. Look at me. I'm not so religious, not involved. Everyone said I'm a Yid. Not one person. See, we don't focus on this because the difference in Hanukkah and Purim is Hanukkah, they wanted us to assimilate. Purim, they wanted us dead. But there was a way to get out of that decree. If you say you're not Jewish, they're fine. You're out. If you belong to Mordechai, then you'll be killed. And that's why the Gemara says that Purim is the wedding of the Jewish people to Hashem. Why is it the wedding? Because when we received the Torah initially, what happened? We just came out of Mitzrayim. We were slaves. We were in a desert. There's nowhere. You have to get food. Hashem is giving you food. You're stuck. Where are you going to go? Hashem comes along and says, we're giving you a Torah. Okay, we'll take it. Fine, good. But you know, we have 2 tablets. Hashem came and said, you want the luchais, you want the tablets. And the Yidden said, how much is it? She said, it's free. Okay, we'll take 2. We ended up with 2 of them. We were in a situation where we were, quote, vulnerable. We were desperate. And Hashem forced us. We took it. Purim was a time in history when we weren't interested. It wasn't worth it to be Jewish. You get killed if you're a Yid. Who needs it? And still we said, no, we're doing it. We're sticking to Mordechai no matter what. And these weren't great scholars and people. These were people that ate at the Suda of Achashverosh. They weren't involved in Jewish life the way they should have been. But when your core, when your identity is questioned, this is who I am. I'm not going anywhere. Which will help us understand another question. Why is Hashem's name not mentioned in the Megillah? Throughout the entire Megillah, it doesn't have Hashem's name. It's strange. And because of that, by the way, people question who was the author of the Megillah. We said that it was written in the Persian Chronicles, also written the story. Who was the author? Not only that, but it looks like it's deliberate. Because at the end, when it talks about the cries and the fasting in Perek Tes, chapter 9, the cries and the fasting of the Jews, it says, the words of their fasting and their cries. It doesn't say to who they were crying. Usually, when you say, we called out to Hashem, you don't say it. You deliberately don't put Hashem's name in here. Why? So one explanation says that Mordechai and Esther wanted this to be a universal story, not just for the Jewish people. Everyone's going to read this. And we don't want them, if when they see Hashem's name, they'll say, oh, it's our idol. And they'll turn the story of Purim into some kind of, quote, religious document of someone else. The Ibn Ezra says this. It'll turn into something that belongs to other, quote, people, other nations, and they'll say whenever it says Hashem's name, it means some other idol, some idol. So to avoid that, he didn't put Hashem's name in here at all. But based on understanding the context of what was going on at the time, it makes sense. It makes sense why Purim is so important, and it makes sense why it's called Megillas Esther. The word Esther means haster aster. There's a concealment going on. There's a hiddenness going on. We lived in a time when you didn't see Hashem in a revealed way. We lived in a, quote, assimilated time. You didn't see the fact that because you're Jewish and because you're involved, that's why you have such a special connection, and that's why Hashem is active in your life. You do your thing and enjoy. We didn't feel that. And specifically at that time of history, when the Jewish people did not feel like it was worth it, God was, so to speak, hidden in their lives. They stood up and they risked their lives for it. That's the greatness of Purim. Even Hashem's name is concealed in the Megillah to show you that it was all concealed. There was no, you didn't feel that Hashem was there. It wasn't readily felt. They were living their lives however they were living them. But when it came to the story and the question of, are you Jewish or not? And if you are, we'll kill you. Just say you're not and you're out. Nobody, not one person. And by the way, the decree was for a year. So for an entire year, nobody said, I'm not interested, it's not worth it. And that's why it's such a great joy, because this proved to ourselves, to Hashem, to the world, what a Jew really is at his core. Even if my spark is hidden, even at certain times, certain people, they don't feel their connection to Hashem. They're not inspired. They're not excited about Yiddishkeit. They're not acting that way. It's there. Just like Hashem's name is in the Megillah in a hidden way, just like the hero of Purim is Esther, which means hidden, the Jewish people were at a time when everything was hidden. But it came out. That's the message of Purim. Why Purim is such a joyous time, because it's expressive, it's indicative of who the Jew really is. And our relationship to Hashem may be hidden, but it's very, very real. We don't just sign up when it's convenient. We do it like the story of Purim, even when it was inconvenient to be Jewish. See, in Mitzrayim, you couldn't say I'm not Jewish and get out of slavery. By Purim, you could say you're not Jewish and get out of the decree, and yet nobody did it. And in general, when you have a concealment, sometimes it brings out special powers. It brings out a greater level. That's really what happened. I want to conclude with the story. There was a professor. He was the president of Bar Ilan University, Shlomo Eckstein. I mentioned his name in the past. In 1953, he was, I guess, a teenager or a very early 20s. He was a counselor for the Bnei Akiva movement. They went to Mexico. They did youth programs for a year, trying to involve the youngsters in Jewish life. They didn't have any formal structure of Jewish life there. And it was a one-year program with the option to continue for a second year. And he was between the first year and the second year. He went to New York, 1953. The Rebbe became Rebbe in 1951. 1953 he came and he had a private meeting with the Rebbe. And he tells the Rebbe, him and the other counselors, I don't know if there's a point, he says. I go to Mexico. I spend a year there. We do all these programs and these things for kids. You don't see any results. I leave. They go on with their life. They're kids or they're youngsters. They end up going. They assimilate anyways. What's the point? And the Rebbe told him like this: we have a assurance. Hazeirim bedima brina yikseiru. Those that plant with tears will reap with joy. That when you put an effort, it works. You put in your whole heart, it'll work. You'll have results. And the Rebbe said, I want to give you an example. You're sitting on Shabbos afternoon, you do a program with these youngsters. And you're outside maybe in a park and you have a group of kids sitting and you're telling them stories from the Torah. Another kid walks by, a Jewish kid, he's not involved in this group, but he sat down for a second. And he hears how you're telling the group that we have an ancestor, Avram, had a son, Yitzchak, Yaakov, 3,000 plus years ago. And Avram was born in 1948, from creation, not interesting fact. But in any case, and the Rebbe didn't say that, just a side note. And we are thousands of years, we're a chain, links in a chain of Avram, and you say the story. This kid gets up and leaves, goes to the next place wherever he's playing. Years later, he went to college, he met a girl, she's not Jewish, they decide they want to get married, engaged to be married, and the parents of the bride make a condition. We want you to go to the church and convert. You're Jewish. And he's on the way to the church, says the Rebbe, and he remembers that when I was a kid, he doesn't even remember where he heard it, but he remembers that I once heard there was an Avram who had a Yitzchak and a Yaakov, and we are Jews, and through thick and thin, through history, we survived it all. And the last moment he decides, I'm not doing it. I'm Jewish. I don't know what it means. I'm not going to convert. This, the Rebbe says, is the result of your efforts. Don't underestimate. I don't see results. It's not the case. The Jewish spark, the torch that we have, sometimes in history it was concealed. In the Megillah, it's Esther. You don't have the name of Hashem revealed. The Jews were living at a time, and based on our behavior, you could say, we weren't so into it. But that spark never gets extinguished. We always have that connection. And this is why Purim is celebrated, even after Mashiach comes. This is why the Megillah of Esther will never stop to be read. This is why the mitzvah to rejoice is so great, unlike any other holiday. It's not just another case where they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. It's a lot more beyond than that. It's the expression of who we really are, who we really stand up for. So don't forget to come for Purim. The 4 mitzvahs of Purim, hear the Megillah by night and by day. Give gifts of food to your friends. Give money to the poor. And have a Purim feast on Purim. Thank you for watching. Have a great Shabbos, a good Chodesh.